flickering image on the screen was a gruesome display of blood and gore. A lone figure, shrouded in darkness, dragged a metallic object down a sterile white hallway, leaving a glistening trail in its wake. The rhythmic scrape echoed in the unnatural silence, a sound like fingernails scraping bone. My wife Sarah gripped my hand so tightly her knuckles shone white. This scene in the horror movie, a seemingly mundane nighttime patrol, sent a wave of nausea crashing over me. But for Sarah, it was a stark reminder of her own late-night experiences at the end-of-life facility where she worked. We both knew the limitations of the on-screen horror, but the raw terror in Sarah's eyes as she watched spoke volumes. Here, amidst the popcorn and flickering lights of our living room, the memory of a single night shift cast a long, chilling shadow. "Remember that time on night shift?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the tense soundtrack. The question hung heavy in the air, a cold dread settling in my gut, a premonition that this movie night would take an unexpected turn. Sarah rarely spoke about her work at the facility, the emotional toll, the constant brush with mortality. It was a world I only glimpsed in fleeting anecdotes. But tonight, the chilling scene on screen had unlocked a floodgate of memories, and I knew I was about to hear a story far more terrifying than any fictional horror. My wife wasn't a doctor or a nurse, but an administrator at the facility. Her days were filled with paperwork, organizing patient records and coordinating with families. Yet, this seemingly mundane role placed her at the heart of a place where life hung in the balance. The sterile white walls held stories of resilience and heartbreak, whispered goodbyes, and the quiet dignity of those facing their final days. But beneath the surface, there lurked an unsettling quiet, a feeling that things weren't always as they seemed. Unexplained occurrences, like whispers carried on the faintest breeze, added to the unsettling atmosphere. The first night shift she ever covered was a baptism by fire. Staffing shortages forced her into the role, and the once familiar facility transformed into a web of shadows. The deserted hallways, normally bustling with activity, seemed to press in on her. The only sounds were the rhythmic hum of life support machines and the occasional unsettling groan from unseen corners. The silence itself felt heavy, pregnant with an unspoken tension. Hers office, nestled amongst cubicles filled with inactive computers and silent phones, felt like an island in a sea of darkness. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of paper, sent a jolt of adrenaline through her system. Venturing outside for a simple bathroom break became an ordeal. The sterile white hallways, devoid of the usual daytime bustle, stretched into an endless expanse. The fluorescent lights cast an eerie glow, highlighting dust motes dancing in the stale air. Each step echoed in the unnatural quiet, a constant reminder of her isolation. One particularly unnerving moment shattered the repressive stillness. A low, guttural moan echoed down the hallway, seemingly coming from a distant room. Heart pounding frantically against her ribs, Sarah grabbed a flashlight, her mind conjuring images of a confused patient wandering the halls. Following the sound, she cautiously navigated the deserted corridors, the silence broken only by her own ragged breaths. Reaching the source, a darkened room with an empty bed, a wave of cold dread washed over her. There was no patient, no explanation for the unsettling moan. The realization that it wasn't a patient's cry sent a shiver down her spine. As the night wore on, the isolation gnawed at Sarah. Every clang of metal, every creak of the floorboards, sent a jolt of adrenaline through her system. The routine tasks that filled her days now felt daunting under the weight of the darkness. The following days brought their own unsettling occurrences. The nurses spoke in hushed tones about the deaths in threes, a chilling pattern where 3 patients would pass away in quick succession. Adding to the mystique were the stray cats. While they were occasionally fed by staff and visitors, Sarah noticed an uncanny influx of felines whenever a death occurred. They'd flock in the hospital garden, their sad meows adding another layer to the already dark atmosphere. One particularly poignant memory involved Sarah delivering paperwork to a family member in a patient's room. The patient, a grandmother in a coma-like state, began speaking in a language she didn't recognize. As soon as the family member arrived, the strange language ceased. Sarah, bewildered, inquired about the grandmother's language skills. The family member, confused, replied, "English, of course." It was a fleeting moment, but one that left a profound mark on Sarah. The pandemic brought its own set of horrors. With family visits restricted, a palpable despair settled over the facility. Many patients, already facing their mortality, seemed to lose the will to fight. Sarah confessed to coming home in tears almost every day during that time, the weight of loss pressing heavily on her. The cheerful, vibrant woman I knew seemed dimmed, her smile strained. She spoke of the quiet goodbyes exchanged over video calls, the heartbreaking pleas from families desperate for one last touch. It was a constant battle to maintain a sense of normalcy, a facade that crumbled in the privacy of our home. One particularly stormy night, the already unsettling atmosphere at the facility was amplified by a power outage. The building plunged into darkness, the only light flickering from emergency backup generators. The rhythmic hum of the machine seemed to mock the fragile hold on life within these walls. Trapped in her office, with only the faint glow of her mobile phone, she felt a primal fear grip her. A sound pierced the silence, a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from the hallway outside her door. Sarah strained to listen. The tapping was slow, deliberate, like a blind person feeling their way down a hallway. Panicking, she quickly felt around in the dark for a weapon, grasping only a stapler on her desk, a pathetic defense against whatever lurked in the darkness. The tapping grew closer, each sound echoing in the silence. Just as she was about to scream out for dear life, the tapping stopped. Trembling, Sarah waited for what felt like an eternity before daring to open the door. The hallway was empty, bathed in the eerie blue glow of the emergency lights. Relief washed over her, so intense it almost made her knees buckle. But as she turned to go back inside, a glint of metal caught her eye. In the corner, nestled against the wall, lay a single white cane. The implications sent a fresh wave of terror coursing through her. If there was no one there, who was tapping the cane? That night solidified Sarah's decision. She wouldn't be bullied into another night shift. The emotional toll, coupled with the unexplained occurrences, was simply too much to bear. The credits rolled, the silence in our own living room suddenly heavy. I looked at Sarah, her face pale in the dim light. "It's not all bad," she said softly, as if sensing my unspoken concern. "There's a lot of beauty there, too, a quiet strength in the face of the inevitable." But despite her words, I knew this glimpse into her world had forever changed my perception of the seemingly sterile end-of-life facility. Just then, a familiar guttural moan echoed faintly from somewhere outside our apartment. The sound, barely audible but unmistakable, sent a jolt of terror through me. Sarah's eyes widened, a flicker of dread crossing her face before it was replaced by a steely resolve. We exchanged a silent glance, the unspoken question hanging heavy in the air. Was it the wind, a stray animal, or something far more sinister that had followed her home from the hushed whispers of the halls? The movie was over, but the real chills had just begun.